I think, when you do forecast like we are, it's always a big question who's going to remain with their junior hockey teams. Why should you go to juniors? And it's often not the kids that are determining whether or not they're going to be big productive players. It's whether or not they're given an opportunity. He's a terrific player. His USHL run this year was 1 game, no points. And pretty obvious decision to come back and play for your high school team. So he's just in an environment where there's some players, whether they're older or in the good graces of the coach because they've played there the prior seasons. Tough spot for him to leave, not play in the Upper Midwest High School Elite League where he would have had a lot more ice time and probably had a lot more fun. So tough run for him, but I just think that makes him thirsty. He's probably chomping at the bit to get out for high school.
Season 2 is here, everyone. It's the Inside Scoop podcast. I'm your host, Julian Lockhart. Alongside John Conley, we did a boys season preview for Class AA a season ago, and we're back for round 2. So I can't wait to jump into this episode with you, John. Thanks for joining me once again.
Yeah, Julian, we also did a section preview show and then a state tournament preview show. And just to blow your horn a little, highest 3 rated Inside Scoop episodes are those 3. So this is a lot of fun to come back a year later. So thanks for having me. I'm super excited for the start of the high school hockey season. And I went and rewatched our preview show last year, and we did a real good job looking at who was likely to make the state tournament. You and I were both all in on Shakopee. They appeared for the first time. I even had on my preseason number 1. Rogers made the state tournament for the first time. We talked a lot about them. It was kind of a coin toss, Section 4, Stillwater, Hill Murray, and obviously either one of those could have won the state tournament. So we did a real good job, and I think we missed seeing that Moorhead was going to improve as much as they did year over year because the same players didn't quite ever get it all on track. But boy, what a force last year. It was such a fun season, and congrats to Moorhead. So one of the things I'm sure we'll cover is, can they repeat?
Yeah, they lost a number of their Big Ten players to juniors, but yeah, they're going to be back and really good, I think. And of course, talking about Bantams, they keep winning. They keep winning Bantam AA championships. They're super good. So I can't wait to cover them. So we're going to start off with some Mr. Hockey, just naming a handful of players who we think are going to be good contenders for this year. We'll touch on the Reed Larson Award as well, and then we'll give you guys section by section breakdown and our thoughts and our predictions upcoming this year. And then we'll finalize with a couple of state championship contenders. I think you and I, John, can all agree we kind of have the same top 3, but we'll reveal that towards the end. So I want to get started with Mr. Hockey, and I think right now this is a pretty wide open race. I would say there's, in my opinion, no one really a huge front runner from players I wanted to mention. Cole Cheeseman out of Holy Angels, and he's been very productive the past couple of seasons for the Stars. But I think the big question is now not having Henry Lechner there due to moving on to juniors. How big of an, he has been so good for Holy Angels. I mean, he was a front runner for sure in Mr. Hockey a season ago, and a player who scored, I think, over 80 points last year and was one of the favorites to win Mr. Hockey. So without him on his line, I know you have Lincoln Ayers-Assad, who's another fantastic player, but I'm curious without Lechner how his points will look like. I would imagine his points will go down a little bit, or at least it'd be tough for them to increase, but I think Holy Angels trying to make one more stab at trying to go in 6AA. I think we are looking to see Cole Cheeseman have that really big senior season, and it's great to see him return. I got to see him a little bit in the CCM High Performance League over the spring and summer, and he's a fantastic player, really fun to watch.
When you talk about preseason list for Mr. Hockey, forecasting who's going to win or who the finalists, I have both Lincoln Ayers-Assad and Cole Cheeseman on my list. Cole Cheeseman, 26 goals, 39 assists, 65 points. Lincoln Ayers-Assad, more goals. He had 30, 27 assists, 57 points. I do not see those numbers going down. You mentioned Henry Lechner's gone. Yes, he is. He had 96 points last year, not 80. It was
Wow.
quite a big number.
I undershot him.
Yeah, they're loaded with great players that have played a lot of high school hockey at the top. Last year, Avi Kazargad had 48 points. Gabe Perron had 57. There's a couple defensemen. So my point is, when you put out a line with Ayers-Assad and Cheeseman, and behind them have defensemen like that, or Teddy Lechner, who got to fill in for the USA national program this fall, they're going to have the best players on the ice, no matter who they're playing against. So they're that strong when they're on the ice, and they do not have as hard of a schedule as some of the teams in a tougher conference. So I don't see the train slowing down at all. And when you put it together, I do think those are serious consideration for finalists. Now, maybe one has a lot more points than the other on their team, and maybe that gets only one of them. But you ought to see a Holy Angel Star or two on the list of 10 finalists. I'm that bullish on Cheeseman and Lincoln Ayers-Assad.
They're both fantastic players, and I got to call a lot of their games 2 seasons ago now, and unfortunately I don't think I'll make it down there for many of their games. Maybe a roadie if they come up to the northwestern area of the metro, but yeah, they're fantastic, really fun to watch. Hopefully they have a good year, and then we're going to go out to the northern part of the state. Titan Bergeson, returning from the USHSL, going from Madison, who is about a point per game right now for the Capitals. And yeah, from you, John, he's going to be going back to Moorhead. And I think just his production this offseason in the USHL being so productive and now returning for his senior year, I mean, I think he immediately becomes a Mr. Hockey contender, in my opinion. I know you lose Zimmerman to Fargo and Mason Kraft, of course, in juniors as well. So big losses there, but Moorhead always seems to fill the holes, fill in the shoes, and that's why I have tied in there as another one of my Mr. Hockey contenders.
Yeah, unquestionably will be one of the state's top players. It's very interesting at this time having a discussion about who's going to stay with their junior hockey team for those that are playing some fall hockey, and then who's going to return. And a lot of time things change even from what the player's intention is, just because of how things are going. It's not that many years removed from when Cranky, Damon Gardner, and Bump came back from Omaha right at Thanksgiving time, and it's never final. We've learned that for the players that have maintained the academic standing at the school they left. So I'll mention an oddity here. You mentioned graduating Mason Kraft, 95 points, 46 goals. That's a big loss. Aiden Bergeson's a senior, and last look, he was leading his USHL team in scoring, and he's returning for his senior year. Big loss for Madison. Great for Minnesota high school hockey. Great for the Spuds. Zach Zimmerman is a junior, but Zach's a little over age for a normal junior, and it's his NHL draft year. And I have talked to someone with familiarity inside the program. It's been 3 weeks, so maybe things change. He was not as productive in the USHL as Bergeson. He had 3 goals, 3 assists last time I looked after 12 games up in Fargo. But it's his NHL draft year, and there could be a perception that, hey, I need to be here playing at the higher level junior hockey than high school. It's funny what happens in reality, because we saw Cooper Simpson, I think, go in the 3rd round, and Brent Solomon go in the 5th round, and now 1 year removed from Minnesota high school hockey, they're the leading scorers in the USHL. So it's not necessarily reality, but when you have college commitments and when you have NHL buzz, there's no question that players are listening to that, and their families are trying to make decisions about what's best based on the recommendations they receive. And those recommendations are clearly that we'd like to see players in a higher level league. They're not clearly always correct. It may not really matter. You can't derail a player. Casey Middlestad going 8th after playing a season for Eden Prairie certainly, cements that in my mind. But yeah, Tyden Bergeson, he'll be more than 51 points this year, and he'll definitely be a finalist because Moorhead will be a top team all year long. It's hard to figure out who's going to stay with their junior hockey team and who's going to come back. Casey Vandertop is an interesting one. 50 points for Edina last year, phenomenal player, won a state championship in Bantam in 9th grade, high school in 10th grade, and, certainly could say, hey, my time's done here, and left to go play junior hockey, Lincoln Stars, did an interview saying he was definitely gone. Only had 1 assist in the first game, and last night had his first goal. So, just 2 points. And I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of times the pull from your high school friends, hey, come on back, let's go do this. A lot of times that pull can bring kids back. So I wouldn't be surprised if he returned, and if he did, would be a certainly top candidate. Kaz Carlson plays for Rock Ridge, could put up a lot of points up there in the Iron Range. Nate Peterson, Shakopee. Looking at other people's rankings, I've got Shakopee 4 and Cretin 11 because I'm assuming everyone comes back from Shakopee or close to it, and nobody comes back from Cretin. But if it was reversed and the players did return to Cretin and not to Shakopee, I would flip those teams. So it's a bit of a crapshoot, but there's just a top player that, should he return, would be in the mix. I really like Charlton and Anderson from Cretin, but I believe they will stay in junior hockey from, the buzz I've heard. What we really can't move on without covering are those Class A guys, and Class A guys that I think would have a shot. Garrett Fisher from Crookston could put up just so many points that it's maybe enough to stand out in a field where if others look to have similar credentials. And Erickson from Blake. Blake has been a AA team for the last few years, and he is a great player, huge, 6'4" forward with great touch and great skills. So now they moved to Class A and could really have an explosive year. So there's just a couple more that I would add to the list in addition to those usual suspects that are the top players in the biggest schools.
Tate Swanson out of Hibbing Chisholm as well, which I think they might be the front runner in boys A this year, team that was a bit short of the Class A state championship from a year ago. Tate Swanson, I think, expected to have a really big year for
every
Hibbing
preseason
Chisholm.
ranking for A that I've seen has Hibbing. Every person that I've talked to, everyone says Hibbing. So to your point, Hibbing Chisholm, Tate Swanson, a lot of really good underclassmen on that team as well last year. So they're going to be fun, not just this year, but also beyond.
Yeah, promising future up there for sure. Now moving to the Reed Larson, the state's best defenseman. One school I think I began with was Rogers, that has produced 2 of the last 3 Reed Larson, Nolan Gertis last year, and then in 2023, Chase Cheslock, now with the University of St. Thomas, Gertis playing in Madison. There's still a couple of players who I think have a really good shot that I've gotten to watch a lot. Jaden Kurtz, and then Matthew Hauser, or better known as Matty Hauser. I think that's how people address him. I really like them to step up into a lead role. Rogers lost their 2 top defensemen, Gertis and then Jackson Smith Connect, from their graduation senior year from a year ago. And again, I think there's a lot of big holes to fill with those positions, but Jaden Kurtz, I think, really had the most involvement with that top line last year defensively, so I expect him to return to that role, and then Matthew Hauser to fill in for Gertis at that top D pair position. So I think between the two, those two will be really studs and really lock down potentially the state's best top defensive pair in Minnesota for the Rogers Royals. And they're going to need it considering their section move to 6AA, the most stacked section I think I've ever seen since covering high school hockey. I'm much younger than you, John, but we'll get to that a little bit later. A little sneak peek. 6AA, fantastic this year. But Jaden Kurtz, Matthew Hauser, that's who I wanted to start with for Reed Larson. John,
yeah, so Rogers decor is
thoughts?
interesting. They have a boomerang. So interesting. Blake Sinclair, 9th grade Gentry, 10th grade, went to Rogers, was ineligible for varsity, played junior varsity, and then last year, moving to 11th grade, got stuck in a log jam and just wasn't able to get enough playing time. Through no fault of his own, as just they had a great decor last year, like you mentioned. So he left around Christmas time, played with the Long Island Gulls, and now is back. So I bring that up because I think it's hard. And then Jake Burmas coming off the Bantam team. He might be the next Reed Larson Award winner out of Rogers. He's a real fun player to watch. But I think it's hard to stand out on your own team sometimes when there's a lot of other good players. And I'll use Wayzetta's forwards a year prior, not 2025, but 2024 as an example. The exception was Gertis. Obviously, he was the kind of that slick skating specialist, put up a lot of points that got the attention, probably narrowly beating Jake Toll for the award last year. So it might be hard to stand out on your own team with Rogers. And I do like both Kurtz and Hauser. They both look good when I see them play. I think the state's deepest core for defense is at Minnetonka. It's an interesting group. They returned Browning and Carl from last year's varsity, as well as Merrick. And Merrick got named as one of the other players to follow on the NHL Central Scouting watch list. So maybe a little less visibility on him, not as big of a name. Maybe Markwell comes back to high school having played 3 prior years of varsity. He was, or at least 2. He played 9th grade at Chaska and he played 11th grade at Minnetonka. I don't know how much varsity time he got in 10th grade at Minnetonka, but, an experienced player. And they bring in on transfer Tate Hardiker. So Great Tate is kind of a physical oddity, weighs about 220 pounds and moves well. He's big, he's skilled, has a mean streak, and Tate Hardiker could have an explosive year at Minnetonka. And, maybe out of that group, with the seniors I just mentioned, maybe it's Tate Hardiker that gets the most attention. But at the same time, maybe it's just you're not able to stand out on that team because there's just so many parts and all the defense are doing their job. But nonetheless, the skipper's absolutely loaded across the blue line.
I absolutely agree with you, John. I think Minnetonka is the strongest team when it comes to defensemen. And that was my other player who I wanted to touch on, Tate Hardiker, transfers from Southwest Christian Richfield, played a couple of seasons for them. And I really like his game, I think, offensively. I mean, it's hard to say going from Southwest Christian, right? I mean, Class A now to AA powerhouse and Section 2 AA. I mean, it's hard to say how productive he'll be and how much attention he'll grab, right? Just because you have so many other moving parts. I think that was perfectly said. I do think in terms of points, I believe he'll be the point leader, at least for defensemen. He's a good scorer. He's got a very good shot. And I think for his senior year, I mean, I think he's very upcoming. And I think he's got potential to really break out. And Minnetonka, a team that I think of 2018 Minnetonka, one of the best teams in the state, they win the state championship. 2023 Minnetonka, one of the best teams, they win the state championship. But then those off years, I feel like Minnetonka, they definitely had more of a mid-tier team for their standards, right? They're always solid, but for their standards, they're maybe a little bit more in the middle, trying to rebuild, right? This year, I think they've got an opportunity, mainly by their defensive core, to take that step up again and be one of the best teams in the state, making it back to the X and competing for a state championship. And with the addition of Hardaker, I think that increases those chances. So I really like him to potentially win that Reed Larson award. That's pretty much everyone I had on my
last year. It can be hard to stand out on your own team. Somehow he did, but I wouldn't put any of the Minnetonka players in the mix when I see who else is a potential candidate. Mickelson from Moorhead, Gabe Perrone from Holy Angels, huge points last year and should have again this year. Steinhoff, if he plays for the high school team at Shakopee, going through Class A, Griffin Sturm and Broden Honfet from St. Cloud Cathedral and War Road, and kind of a sleeper. A lot of attention because Ben Geiger committed to the Gophers and went to the U.S. national program. But what about Bridger Riley for Northfield? I think I looked him up and he had 50 points last year, something like that. So, you're going to look at resumes at the end of 20, 25 games and have these people who are identified as candidates based on, reputation coming to the season and, hey, what did they do this year? And I think it's pretty easy for a player like Bridger Riley to stand out again and get some attention. Over at Edina, it's Peckham is the senior with the most minutes returning, and Edina should be a top team, and he'll probably look good all year long. So, maybe throw him into the mix. So, I think that's generally an award that is pretty wide open on paper before the season, and usually crystallizes, and maybe by January we have a short list of 3 that should be the most likely winners out of the 10 finalists. And there's always some of the final 10 that nobody would have projected at the beginning of the year. Just kind of the nature of the beast. Good senior year, you can get some attention and get onto that list.
I think what's interesting too about this award, I think we all come back to, defensemen who score points, right? I also do want to kind of throw in guys, especially like a Danny Browning from Minnetonka, who doesn't really score a whole lot, doesn't really get involved on the stat sheet a whole lot, but defensively, it's just a true defenseman, right? Making really good plays, making those plays that don't show up on the stat sheet. So I think at the end of the day, it's hard to argue against guys who are, putting up defensemen 40, 50 points. It's tough to say no to that, but I also don't want to leave out players who, might only finish the season with 10 or 15 points or 20 points, right? But who are truly, really good defensemen. So a wide open race for the Reed Larson. I think there's a lot of really good guys returning from all over the state who really can compete. I want to move now into section 2AA. So we're going to go now kind of break down each section here for the rest of this show. I want to start out with 2AA. And this has been a section that's been a little all over the place. Late 2010s, we had Minnetonka, you had Eden Prairie go on their big run. And then in the 2020s, we have had 5 different section champions. Last year was Shakopee with all their great players with Simpson and Peterson, Chanhassen in 2024, and who made the state championship game that year. 2023, of course, you have Minnetonka, who were the state champs that year. Prior Lake in the Alex Bump era, who had a phenomenal season. And then Eden Prairie in 2021, the kind of the semi-COVID year, right? And Eden Prairie winning the state championship last year. And this year, I think right now, the favorite is Minnetonka. I'm seeing a decent amount of these teams on the lower end of the list, who I think still have potential. I think Shakopee is definitely a contender just because we saw them do it last year. But the loss of Cooper Simpson, I think, is huge just because he's such a great player, and he's been proving it, right, in the USHL, the second leading point scorer right now. Minnetonka, I think defensively, the question is, okay, can that really move them through this section? But then also offensively, right at the end of the day, you got to score goals. So which of those players can take the next step and become that guy where, hey, maybe you get a goal a game on average, right? Who can fill into that role? And for Minnetonka, I just don't know. I don't really know I personally don't know enough about them, but I think right now for me, it's going to be pretty big between Minnetonka and Shakopee, and then a little bit of Holy Family Catholic, who's always competitive in the section as well.
It's interesting. It was hat tip to our fellow announcer with MN Hockey TV, Joe Cook. He was the one that pointed out to me last year that it was 5 different schools in a row. And what I think is so interesting is it's 5 public schools, and some of them making their first state tournament appearance. So that has been very wide open. I think it's odd. We have top Catholic schools year in, year out: St. Thomas, Cretin, Hill Murray's, at Cloud Cathedral, but Holy Family's never been able to climb over that hump on the boys' side, and is not one of those 5. Short and simple, Section 2A's 2-horse race. I don't see anyone other than Shakopee or Minnetonka making the state tournament. For me, my preseason, I've got Shakopee number 4, Minnetonka number 8. Shakopee's so tough because they have players playing junior hockey that I think others are assuming don't return. Let's just take a look. Cooper Siegert is with Fairbanks, which is a North American team, not a USHL team. 1 goal, 4 assists in his first 15 games. And Carson Steinhoff, 0 goals, 1 assist in his first 10 games with a North American team in Forest Lake called the Minnesota Mallards. So, I think the poll at the end, if they're able to come back to school, is that they would like to play high school. Jack Kolchin is a great defenseman. He's with Green Bay. Big defenseman, 0 goals, 3 assists, 14 games. And Nate Peterson, he was 3-3 through 14 games. So, nobody was setting the world on fire out of the forwards. And even without one of the defensemen, there's a lot returning here. Wasson Gesso's a great player, real high level of hockey.
No, absolutely.
Dalen Klein. There's some other players that did not get a chance to play last year, including some, even staying on junior varsity for the whole year that had played varsity before that. So I think Shakopee is going to be better than others think. Their goaltender, he's in a tough spot. Lunneborg left, is in a Western Hockey League. The starting goalie was drafted by the Islanders, and they just traded for a second string goalie who's 20 years old in the league that only allows 20-year-olds. So, they'd like Lunneborg back. I don't know if he's able to come back. Without him, they get Houston. He's filled in with the U.S. national team a year ago. So they should have enough in goal. Is it enough to take out Minnetonka? I mentioned I think they've got the state's deepest defensive core. Minnetonka's got to find some scoring. And playing in the North American League, Cade Lindsay got a taste of some higher level stuff. He's their leading returning scorer. And along with Sturgis and Schultz and Jordan Johnson, they're about a line and a half deep, which probably not enough to bubble up to the top of the Lake Conference, but certainly, toe and toe with Shakopee, and it's kind of a 2-horse race. Those other teams in the section, I'd be very surprised if anyone else reaches the conference final or the section final.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be difficult for Eden Prairie just because they've lost so much. I think they're still trying to have to rebuild, right? And then Holy Fam, I just think it's difficult. They've made section finals. I know last year they beat Eden Prairie in the semis to reach the section final, but Shakopee walked all over them. And I think they can compete, but again, right now, just looking at the preseason, working with what we got, I do agree it's a 2-horse race between Shako and Minnetonka. Yeah, I think that is a big question. Oh, sorry, you go.
Eden Prairie returned 16% of their goals from last year, so they lose 84. So if anyone's wondering to quantify getting hit hard by graduation, one thing, if you're a fan of high school hockey, don't walk, run. Make sure you get to an Eden Prairie game at least once this year to see R.J. Thompson. R.J.'s stay in Minnesota high school hockey will probably be short. He's a 9th grader and from Eden Prairie, but comes to the high school team off of Ballyhood Bantam team, 14U team in Michigan, coached by Ryan Kessler. And I've seen him a lot, and he's skilled. He's pretty athletic, but what really stands out on on repeated viewings is he's got a hockey sense that's just absolutely insanely off the charts. So Eden Prairie will be fun to watch to see RJ Thompson, and it might be his only year because he's probably going to the national program. He's that kind of player. But team-wise, they're going to struggle to get to the section final.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be tough. I think teams like them and Holy Family can compete, but at the end of the day, I think it's Minnetonka, Shakopee, truly the tell who I think the true favorite is out of that section. And now I want to move over to Section 3AA. And this has been a section where it's been pretty dominant between St. Thomas Academy and Cretin-Derham Hall. We've mixed in Rosemount, who just hasn't really been able to get over the hump. And this year, I think it's kind of a similar story. However, STA, I think I got to give a little credit to myself. I had St. Thomas Academy last year as my preseason number 2, and people didn't really have them as high. And then they ended up reaching the state tournament and making the semifinal round. So I was pretty happy with that preseason pick. I do think they're going to take a step down this year just because they've lost so much, but they do have a very intriguing player coming in as a 9th grader as well, Maverick McKinnon, who was the leading scorer for Forest Lake as an 8th grader last year and now brings his talents to the cadets in Mendota Heights. Can't wait.
I was waiting to hear what you'd say, because when you're talking about a very intriguing player coming into St. Thomas as a freshman, certainly McKinnon, but I'll throw out Owen Ryan. And there's an outstanding goaltender, about 6'3", 6'4", and he's got to win the space in the crease. But one of the brightest young goaltending prospects we've seen in Minnesota high school hockey in a long time.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, he'll have to earn his spot for the cadets, but I believe he's got a chance for sure, and especially with Cade Neeson graduating, I think that spot's pretty wide open there. St. Thomas, they lose a lot. You lose Jackson Rude, you lose Michael Mikan. I mean, you lose a couple of your top players. Another player who I think has a chance for Mr. Hockey, Cole Brownshausen, who I've seen a lot. He is super fast. Like, he has got some Superman speed. He flies down the ice, and he's a really good goal scorer as well. And then the other team who I think has been in competition, Cretin-Derham Hall, and they're in a similar scenario. They lose a lot of players, Max Anderson, Nate Charlton. You do. Now, I'm not sure, John. I know, according to the book I have in front of me, Jonathan, Blodow? Is he returning for his sophomore year at Cretin?
Johnny Bladow, to my knowledge, will be on the high school team this year. He's pretty young. He's a phenomenal player. So Cretin, they would return if everybody came back 67% of their scoring. But if you throw out Charlton and Max Anderson, it drops to 37. So they are hit pretty hard with losses if those players stay in junior, which is expected. They also have Phoenix Cahill, one of their defensemen, playing in the Western Hockey League, and it's expected that he remains there. So Cretin is in the mix. They've got a lot returning, and you mentioned Bladow, one of the state's better younger players. St. Thomas, they lost 66% of their scoring. You mentioned a few names. You left off Will Dozian, and I want to mention Will Dozian because it was a day we'll never forget. People that have already forgotten, they'll never forget because they're going to hear about this day forever. And that was Friday, February 28th, because the other sections were done. All eyes were on section 3 and 4, and they were great coin toss games on paper. Both of them went double overtime. And it was Will Dozian ending it in that win over Cretin-Derham Hall. So I think we've got a top 3 here where it's a 3-horse race. I've got all 3, Rosemont, St. Thomas, and Cretin, in my top 11 preseason picks. And it's big advantage to get the number 1 seed because there's a pretty big fall off. There's no spoiler out there. And I'm going to go with Rosemont. I really like what I've seen. They returned more than half their scoring. They've got plenty of star power. They had some pretty good players from Bantams. They should have a pretty deep team. And, it's pretty easy. It always is for me to root for public school going against private school in some of these sections. Several years now, but I don't know, 6-7 years ago, I remember a Burnsville team that took St. Thomas all the way to the end, lost 2-0 with an empty netter. you couldn't help but love the team, and they were pretty senior heavy, and that was the last we heard from Burnsville. Rosemont knocking on the door. They've had some great players come through there. They've had some teams right on the cusp. And this might be the year to get through. So 3-horse race, and I think, you really can't go wrong. All three will represent well at state, but I'd love to see Rosemont get through.
Yeah, me too. I do believe this is the year to do it just because Cretin and STA are a little bit down. But again, those teams, what make them so great, they always figure out how to win, right? Even when heading into the year, there's some big questions. But one player I want to highlight too, Kay Sherman, the Augustana commit, scored 50 points last year. I think has potential to reach into the 60s for points this year. And again, they return a lot of depth, and Sam Clements as well at goal. So Rosemount, yeah, I think this is their year. It's not guaranteed. I think they would love to go for the number 1 seed, right? Because whoever gets that 2-3, that's going to be a couple tough battles. But if they can get the 1 and march their way to the section final, yeah, I think Rosemount will stay really competitive. And with those players leading the way, I think Sherman, an underrated Mr. Hockey. I don't know if he's going to be considered in the semifinal as a semifinalist, even just because there's so many players. But he's a guy really to watch out for. Any last lingering thoughts before we move on to Section 4?
Yeah, you mentioned Kate Sherman. I think when you do forecast like we are, it's always a big question who's going to remain with their junior hockey teams. And then the discussion earlier, why should you go to juniors? And it's often not the kids that are determining whether or not they're going to be big productive players. It's whether or not they're given an opportunity. And I'll use Sherman as an example. He's a terrific player. His USHL run this year was 1 game, no points. And pretty obvious decision to come back and play for your high school team. So he's just in an environment where there's some players, whether they're older or in the good graces of the coach because they've played there the prior seasons, tough spot for him to leave, not play in the Upper Midwest High School Elite League where he would have had a lot more ice time and probably had a lot more fun. So tough run for him, but I just think that makes him thirsty. He's probably chomping at the bit to get out for high school. And final thought about junior hockey is what we hear year in, year out, over and over again is the kids that come back think it's going to be easy, and then they find out it's not. You're technically, seen as playing against a lower level opponent, but the kids are coached, and it's not easy to just jump back in the waters and put up big points in high schools. Even Casey Middlestat struggle with that. So, yeah, great call out. Sherman's a great player. He's going to have a great year for Rosemont. And they've got enough others. They return almost 60% of their scoring. So I'm excited. Rosemont's my pick for 3.
Yeah, I'm going to go with you, John. Rosemount, unanimous for Section 3. And now we move over to Section 4 AA. That was really strong last year with Stillwater and Hill Murray. And then the Ponies, they make it to state for the first time in, I don't know if it was ever, at least a long time. I know this section has been pretty much dominated by White Bear and Hill Murray. And then Stillwater, they end up going to the state championship game and losing 7-6 to Moorhead, and just a crazy game.
Crazy.
I think right now, a pretty heavy favorite's Hill Murray, not only to win this section, but to win the state championship. I mean, they bring back arguably the top line in the state, Caden Zazda, Chaz Lentz, and Riley Zupfer, one of the state's best goalies as well. And then there's a couple of guys who are younger players who are expected to take a big leap this year, including Gavin Godbout, a freshman defense, the younger brother of Dylan Godbout, and then Landon Samper, the younger brother of Bowden Samper, who was their leading scorer from a year ago. So although they lost a decent amount of their depth, I think there's a lot of young talent coming up who's expected to fill that role and who have potential to fill it well. And then with the mix of that top line of Lentz and Zupfer and company, I think that bakes a really good program, and that, again, is historically a winner. Now, they haven't made the state tournament since 2023. White Bear Lake upset them in 24. Stillwater made their way in 25. I think now is a good opportunity for them to make it back to the X and not only go and play for a section title, but making it a state championship title this year. That's definitely got to be on Lechner's radar.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at how much Hill Murray's lost. They had Greeter and Cottingham played 3 years varsity on defense. They're gone. Carson Scott leaves for the national program, one of their bright young stars on defense. So they've got some replacements needed across the blue line. They lose Sam Pear, who put up 73 points. But when we go across the section, there's just nobody else that's even close on paper. Maybe a big season from Road at White Bear. Maybe they could pull the spoiler in the section tournament, but I see Hill Murray in a pretty big fall off. They return half their scoring if Zupfer comes back. He's been playing junior hockey, and they've got a strong goaltender and enough of a program. You know, there's a lot always coming up through the ranks with Hill Murray to fill the void. So I like Hill Murray. I've got him my preseason number 2.
Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, I have them winning the section, and I have them as my preseason number 3. So pretty much on the same page with that.
Yeah, Stillwater, they lost 76% of their goals, and if Jarvis doesn't come back from junior hockey, and he's not expected to, that number goes up over 90. So some people that may not follow it as close, kind of like Chanhassen the year before. Well, what about Chanhassen? You know, Chanhassen doesn't have any of those players. Stillwater, they have very few. They also have another defenseman that's off playing junior hockey, and Stillwater will not be a threat to return to the state tournament this year. But what a run it was. And they that I mentioned that Friday the 28th, it was 2 really late Hill Murray goals to force overtime. It was 3-1 Stillwater, and Hill Murray got 2 goals in the last 4 minutes, and it was Matthew Volkman. So Matthew Volkman winning the section with the walk-off double overtime winner. So that's a day we'll never recreate. 2 double overtime games for the last 2 berths with state title contenders. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, unreal stuff. You can't make it up. I want to go to Section 5 AA now. A little interesting. So you get a newbie. You get Andover switching over from 7 AA, which I think is the right decision, right? Just based off geographical location. I do think this section is a bit down. Maple Grove is the front runner in this section. Centennial returns a lot, but one team that I remember you texted me about, John, that you think is a sleeper, underrated, who has a chance to upset their way is Blaine. And this maybe isn't the best Blaine team we've seen when they had the Brodzinskis, right? Mr. Hockey in 2019. I remember the run they made. Oh, I think it was 2019 when they made the state semifinals at the X, and they were a great team. They haven't made it back since. This has been a section dominated by Maple Grove. I think if you were to keep Rogers in this section, they would be the favorite again, but now they move to the loaded 6 AA, which is coming up next. And Maple Grove, I mean, there's a lot to like from them. I think they return a decent amount of players, and again, with their Osseo Maple Grove youth, they're always having players moving up, and they're very successful as well. But Blaine, and you can really take the lead on Blaine. I mean, I got to see them last year in their semifinal against Rogers in this section, and they were very competitive. They return, their top 7 players, but they do lose their starting goalie, which I think hurts them a little bit. But they have a couple of backups who played a decent amount as well, so I think they'll be okay there. Overall, though, I think this is pretty wide open with Centennial. And then you can't forget Andover, who had just a wild season last year, lost, their first 11 games, and then ends up making the state tournament out of 7 AA. So they're back to 5 now, which I think will be interesting. I would say between Maple Grove, the front runner, but following behind them, not too far away, is Andover and Blaine in my eyes.
Yeah, Section 5's real interesting. You lose the returning champion, but you have a team in the section that could return to the state tournament, as you mentioned, with Andover coming over. So the story across the section is how much these teams were unaffected by graduation losses. So to quantify that for you, Maple Grove, who I have as my preseason top, they're number 5. They have 68% of their scoring returning, Andover 75%. Blaine is a whopping 82, and there's some good players at Blaine. I've got them in my top 15. Centennial, 95% of their scoring returns, and Totino Gray's 61%. The significant loss there being Trey Peck. So when you go across the section, it's, for me, a clear number 1 with Maple Grove, but several teams that could bump them off. And I think without question, Section 5 has the best quarterfinals. I think Section 2 that we spoke about has the best finals, along with Section 1, Lakeville North and South, and then it's a big drop-off. And I think the Section 3 final will be the best championship game. But best quarterfinals, without a doubt, Section 5 in my book.
Yeah, and I feel like it's like that every year. I feel like Section 5 is always deep. And even, with Champlain Park, who loses a lot with Solomon, of course, but, they've been in that mix as well. And then you can never forget about Totino Grace, who's always competitive too. Right now, I do like Maple Grove. I'm looking at actually their backup goalie, Ryder Skansen, who plays football for the Crimson. And by the way, we're recording this the morning after the Crimson lost their first game in like 23 games for football. They were beat by Lakeville South, so they won't be going to the bank. So he'll be throwing the goalie pads on a bit early than expected. As a backup, he had a nice .957 save percentage. So assuming he gets the start here for the Crimson, I think he'll actually be pretty good at net. But between Maple Grove and Blaine, I think that would be my section final prediction, but I would have to give the slight edge to Maple Grove. But overall, competitive from the start in this section, and I think it's pretty wide open on who actually makes the section final and reaches the X later in March. Before we move into 6A, which will probably be the beefiest section, any last things you want to add?
Oh, I guess just that a lot of those teams play in the Northwest Suburban Conference as well as Section 5. That's probably the section that has the closest alignment to a conference. So there'll be a lot of familiarity in the playoffs where most of these teams will have played each other the last several years, and the players should know each other and have a recent reference point.
For sure. 6AA. Oh, so juicy. It always is with Edina and Wayzata. Then you throw Holy Angels and Benilde. And then just to top it all off, now it's like Rogers joins the party, which I'm sure the Royals probably aren't necessarily happy to be in this section, just because it's like, okay, now we, it's already hard enough getting through Centennial 2 years ago, Maple Grove 3 years ago. Now it's like, all those teams I just mentioned. This has been a section that's been dominated by Edina the past 4 seasons. And although Edina does lose, I think, your top 2 players in Mason West and then Freddie Schneider to the development team, they're going to be returning, I think, a decent amount of youth and potentially some of their other top guys, as you mentioned as well, potentially Vander Top. I mean, this is really tough. I do like Edina as my favorite. Rogers, I think, will be definitely, I'll be rooting for them potentially to make the section final. But again, when you look at their best player, Cole Bumgarner, on paper, it's a big what if, right? There's a lot of unknowns with him to see how he actually does, and if he can be that guy that, gets 2 points per game that fills the holes. And when you look at Rogers, they played Edina in the state quarterfinals last year, and it was a very competitive game. But when I looked at, how good Rogers was with Mason Jensen and Parker DeShane and Nolan Gertis, you had their starting goalie Wyatt Knott, who was experienced. They couldn't get past the Hornets. It was a really close, tight game, went into overtime, I believe, but they just couldn't get past him. And with all those losses, I just don't see them getting past Edina this year, and potentially even Wyzetta. I know Wyzetta, Eli Moldy will be, I think, one of the best players in the late conference as well. And then you have Holy Angels, who had a lot of potential a season ago. Now you return most of your scoring, but I think the two biggest losses, right? Lechner and then Luke Marsalek at goal. So then the big question is, okay, who's going to be that starting goalie? But then you return all that other offensive production with Ayers, Assad, and Cheeseman and Perron on defense. And then you still, after all that, you have Benilde St. Margaret's, who I think out of these 5 teams takes the biggest hit this offseason, losing Mason Miner and Junior Podine. And I think we talked a little bit about Section 5, right? The quarterfinals. I think that 4 and 5 seed quarterfinal, right? Which, I mean, it could be Wyzetta, it could be Holy Angels. I think Benilde. I think that will be a very intriguing quarterfinal matchup as well. A lot of kind of what ifs in this section, a lot of I don't knows. But at the end of the day, to stay safe, I think it's always a safe bet to lean on the Edina Hornets side with this one.
Yeah, this is bad news for Rogers. Moving to Section 6, it's historically the strongest most years, and when it's not, it's second strongest. It's a loaded section. Edina returns 60% of their scoring if Vandertop and Pitchley return. If they don't, that number drops. But adding in Nash Payne, it sounds like Becker Wenkes will be back. He was amazing as a freshman last year. Edina finished 3rd in the state. Everybody had him at preseason number 1 because they were returning state champs, but they'd lost a lot, and I just wasn't going to look at them that highly. This year, they were pretty darn good last year. They've got 2 great goaltenders coming back, and I really like their crop of D. There's more than enough returning varsity players like Molman, Dubuque. I'd like to see Botts get some time. He was a junior varsity player. This is the remnants of Edina's state Bantam champions from 3 years ago. And Mason West was not on that team. He started the season, and when the high school started, he left the Bantams to play high school varsity. So the team that went to state didn't have West. They did have Schneider. They did have Amir Chabakla that went to Shattuck. They did have, one of the players at Benilde. But you still have a lot of that team. So there's a ton of depth. We know Kurt Giles never shies away from playing younger players. Nash Payne is expected to be a big scorer off of last year's Bantam team. And I think Edina's head and shoulders above the others. I've got Holy Angels, my preseason number 6. I think they'll be a little bit better than last year. Rogers right behind them. And then I've got Wyzetta in the top 12. So I do think Section 6 has the best state section semifinals this year. I think them and Section 7 have the best semis. If you wanted to look at which sections have the best matchups. Kind of an oddity for you, Julian. Last year, Edina blew through the the semis and the finals in the section. They beat Wyzetta pretty handily in the final and Holy Angels in the semi. It was the quarters that was their bugaboo. They came down to the final minute, and I think Armstrong Cooper hit a post as the 8th seed. And so even when you look at the depth down to the 8th and bottom seed, Edina had some trouble. This year, I'd be surprised if Edina doesn't return. There's a lot there. There's some other good teams, but Edina should be they should be in the mix to win a state title this year. And that's even if a few of the players that are off playing junior hockey and could come back don't. So looking forward to it. I'd love to see Holy Angels reach the state tournament. It's been a slow climb getting back to the glory of 20 years ago, but they've got a really nice team. They pick up a good player on transfer, and maybe that's my top spoiler. And I see Rogers kind of relevant, but not able to overcome the pretty tough section. And I'd be surprised if they return to state. They only return 28% of their goals from last year, so they do need to add players like Bumgarner and Sinclair to give them a little bit more to shore up and compete against a very strong section.
Dodgers would need a pretty big boost from Sinclair and Bumgarner and guys like a Brock Cheslock, Augustana commit to
Armas.
really take that big leap. Yeah, he's a really solid player for them as well. So I'm excited to see what they have in store. But yeah, I think the ceiling for them is maybe a section final, but it'll be really difficult for them to get over the hump. Yeah, we'll see. And it's possible, but in my eyes, I think it's unlikely. I think we can both agree Edina, once again, the favorite in this section. And I want to move on to 8AA now, just due to time. Moorhead, I mean, kind of a weird sequence in the past 2 years, right? In the 2023 year, lost in the semifinals for the first time in like 20 plus years that they didn't make a section final. So a crazy streak. And then you go from that, you return just about everybody, and then you win the whole damn thing for the first time in school history. I mean, wow. That is really interesting and really unique for their program. Now heading into this next season, a lot of people's preseason number one, despite losing Mason Kraft and Zach Zimmerman. But then you return Brandon Mickelson, one of the state's top defensemen, Tyden Bergeson, one of the state's top forwards. You have, Max Cullen, I think will be suiting up for them as well. You don't get Joey Cullen, who in some people's eyes, the best 15-year-old prospect in the state of, or in the country, in the United States, who goes on, I believe Honey Baked, right? That's where he'll be playing his next year, Joey Cullen.
Yeah, there's a lot of the players from their Bantam team are with Honey Baked, and good for them. Max Cullen's going to have a great year. He's taken strides, and it's a giant leap forward, similar to what we saw from Brooks Cullen last fall, where they're going to have a great year. And Max has been so fun to watch this fall. So big drop off. The closest to them would be the last teams to go to state from Section 8, Elk River and St. Michael Albertville. Elk River returns 87% of their scoring. St. Michael 80%. Those are big numbers, but they also didn't have great teams last year. They'll be better this year, and they're vying to get into the section final. It's interesting what a big drop off there's been in Roseau. Not one player in the Upper Midwest High School Elite from Roseau, if I'm correct about that. Mm-hmm. And there was a great team up there last year in northern Minnesota in Bemidji. They were so fun to watch, and they gave Moorhead one of their better games early in the year, and just, you get a couple cracks at a great upset and only one in the sections, and they weren't able to do it to beat Moorhead. It was Moorhead's year, but they lose almost everybody and not much coming back. So Section 8's a pretty short story. I think the easiest paths to the state tournament, I'll just kind of recap what we just went through. Easiest paths are Hill Murray and Moorhead. I think Section 4, Section 8, they're just widely cleared for them. The best finals in sections 1, 2, and 3. The best semis in section 6 and 7, and the best quarters are in section 5. My biggest sleepers, Blaine, we talked about them, and the other one, I'm going to put them in my top 15, and they're my favorite for section 7. Duluth Marshall.
Oh, wasn't expecting that. Wow.
No one's expecting it. Take a close look. They returned 94% of their scoring. They had at least 4 players in the Upper Midwest High School Elite League. And there's not a lot of competition up on 7 right now. Rock Ridge was good the last few years. If Carlson returns, they'll have just over half their scoring coming back. Grand Rapids, if they don't get Gorski back, Garski, they're in trouble. And he was traded from one USHL team to another, so he may not be coming back. They lost a lot from last year. So I don't see any reason why Duluth Marshall isn't in the discussion. And I do have them in my preseason top 15, holding down the spot right below Blaine. So those are the ones that I kind of expect to be a shock maybe to people that don't follow it as close.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I follow this pretty close, just with this being my job, and not this podcast, but just other stuff I do. And yeah, no, I wasn't expecting that. That's a deep sleeper. Blaine, I could see. Duluth Marshall, but I take a look. I mean, you're totally right. They return just about everybody. They do deserve to be in the discussion for sure, especially now that Andover has moved out. I think it's still
And just something to point
Rockridge.
just something to point out. Duluth East also does not have any players in the Upper Midwest High School Elite League. And when I asked, hey, what's going on up there? Obviously some of the families may live closer and be Hermantown and whatever. But I do think, outsider, not knowing the inside, I do think that there's just a group of kids that went to private school, kind of like what we've seen where Woodbury kids might go to Cretin. And as a result, Duluth Marshall's going to they'll be one of the better teams in northern Minnesota, and I do think that they'll somehow bubble up over teams with a much richer pedigrees with Rockridge and Grand Rapids to reach the state tournament. The only Metro team in there, I think, is Forest Lake, and that is Cambridge Metro. So what they've done with removing. Yeah, so what they've done with removing Andover is make it more likely that we get another northern team, and why not Marshall?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, well, that was a good little outside scoop right there for you. I want to now kind of finalize our state championship contenders. I mean, I think you said it well. Hill Murray Moorhead have the easiest path to St. Paul, where I think my third option would be Edina, where they arguably have the toughest road to get there, but they always figure out a way. Those are my top three teams. I think there's a pretty good argument I could say really about each and every one of these programs. I'll try to be quick with it, so then I can kind of let you go a little bit more in depth. Moorhead, I mean, just to kind of summarize, you return a lot of great players, a great Bantam youth program, and again, it's Moorhead, Minnesota. They're always producing competitive players. Bergeson, I think, potentially a Mr. Hockey finalist heading into his senior year. He's doing great in Madison, so I think that will translate to the lower level in high school. Edina, despite losing players like West and Schneider, I think you return really good goalies. You have the depth, and again, kind of similar case scenario. The youth is always going to be there, and Becker Wank is another player who I have not gotten to see in person yet. I'm hoping to maybe make it to an Edina game this year to work, but I know really skilled, a player who I think, I don't know if he's national development team eligible yet, if that's maybe on his radar, but or if he's on their radar.
They didn't select him.
Okay.
I see a future NHL player, and
yeah,
I suspect their coach does too, because he cleared the deck and played Wenkus on heavy rotation on a state tournament team that finished third. I just saw them handle a ton of responsibility to a very young player, and he's a standout. And there's a lot of standouts that he reminds me of my favorite defenseman that's come through Minnesota, Eric Polkamp, and he can be pretty darn good and not get us invite to the national program. And I think Wenkus is that kind of player. So, nothing to add. I think everyone you talk to's got the same top three: Edina, Hill Murray, Moorhead, in some order. Season number one, but it's Hill Murray and Moorhead that have the easiest paths to state. So betting odds, I think it's a little more likely that they would be your state champion. And I'll be surprised if it's anyone other than those three teams. But I'm looking forward to finding out if we're right.
I know. Yeah, no, I can't wait. Yeah, the boys season, as you guys see this, we're going to upload this 1 week exactly before the boys starting puck drop on Thursday the 20th. So we'll upload this on the 13th if you have made it this far. We appreciate you tuning in. Again, this is now our second edition of the Boys Double A and throwing in some A season preview. Stay tuned after the regular season, John. I would love to have you back on for a section preview, and we'll really go in depth by each section and break that down. And then, of course, the state tournament preview. How did these teams perform in sections and what we think they'll do at state? I want to give you a big thanks for your time, John, and all your input and your insight, and really giving the viewers the inside scoop on Minnesota high school hockey here, and a fantastic season we have coming up. That's all I have. Any last things? Otherwise, we'll cut it right here.
Yeah, everybody gets to tune in and they can make fun of my picks. I will remind everybody where I have Duluth Marshall and Blaine to start the season. So that's
Confident.
You could, yeah. That's enough reason to get on. They can comment in the section, in the comment part about what an idiot I was. But I stand by those picks. So looking forward to this season.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, John. Well, thank you, and thanks for tuning in, everyone.